And I'd like to welcome everyone once again to the Buffalo History Channel. First of all, I would like to say thank you to all that by the time you're seeing this, you will have already seen our show, which focused on our 2-year anniversary of the Buffalo History Channel. I'd like to thank you all for your support of this platform for the last 2 years. I am so happy to have on the Buffalo History Channel a fellow Juneteenth legacy. Just like myself, as you know that my father was on the original Juneteenth Committee of 1976 for Jefferson Avenue. Well, my guest, well, first of all, let me welcome her to the show. I'd like to welcome Alliah Agostini, Livingstone, to the Buffalo History Channel.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. Now, Alliah's grandfather actually worked with my father. They worked together on the original Juneteenth Committee of 1976. Her grandfather is a man that you all know. He's a legend, a living legend in the Buffalo community. He is none other than the one and only Judson T. Price. Much respect, much respect.
Yes.
Now, we're going to first start off by talking about Alliah's connection. She also, like myself, has a connection to Juneteenth. Now, the first one I want to say, Alliah, your name has sounded very, very familiar. I've seen your name back in the day around in the Challenger. Were you part of the debutante program?
Oh gosh, yes. I did all the things. I was definitely a debutante. I think that was that 1999?
Okay.
1998 debutantes, because yeah, it was like December or so. So yes, I was a debutante back then. I was active in all of the things in the community. I was active with the Buffalo Red Cross and doing things with HIV and AIDS education. I did theater when I was a kid. I was in Jack and Jill. I was a Girl Scout. I did something night away. I was very busy.
Yep, I knew that. I used to see your name around a lot of times, and in the Challenger and everything. So you started off real early.
Yes. But I mean, knowing who my grandfather is and who my family is, it's kind of just what we do, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Alliah is the author of she just released a brand new book called The Juneteenth Story. Now, just for some background, before we get into the book, let's find out what was your background with Juneteenth. How did you first hear about the Juneteenth Festival? What was your first Juneteenth that you attended?
I probably was in utero when I attended my first Juneteenth, to be honest with you. Juneteenth has been in my family since obviously before I was born. My grandfather, as you very well know, all of you all know, helped found Juneteenth. So it was just something that was part of every single June for our family. We would just go by that point to Martin Luther King Park, and hang out at the parade, hang out at the stands with Papa, do whatever we could. I mean, throughout our time there, I remember there was one time anyways, I'll go into it more, but my first Juneteenth was probably in utero.
Okay, so that would probably be, my math is kind of off. So probably either maybe late 80s or early 90s or something like that.
It would have been nice. So I was born in 1982. I turned 40 this year.
Okay.
So I guess the festival was, it wasn't yet, 10 years old. It was new-ish, but it still was pretty well established at that point. But I know my cousin and I were in the little royal court they had one year. I think it was like Amira or something. So we were like the baby princess and the baby prince. We were like 4 years old. My grandfather talked about how he used to get us to help hustle snow cones. He'd tell us to walk around and tell people, "Oh, these snow cones taste good. You should go over to the snow cone baker." We'd hang out there. We also, we had a little stand a couple of times where we sold like handmade pencil toppers and paper flowers. Just have so much history just being at the festival. It was just part of every single June for us.
Right. And our viewers can see that there's a reason why the two of us are wearing the two shirts with the logo. These were two. We're both rocking two original shirts from the Juneteenth festival, as there were two different designs, and we definitely, so in order to keep that tradition alive and pay tribute to Brother Price,
Yes,
definitely want to keep that tradition alive and keep that acknowledgement going.
Exactly. Papa made sure that I had plenty of vintage Juneteenth shirts. So last June we were able, actually my husband had one on, I had one on. They're a little bit too big for the kids, but we were able to rock it because people are like, oh, this is brand new. We're like, not for us. It is not new for us.
In time, they'll grow into them.
Yeah. They will.
Yeah, you'll have plenty set aside for them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get to the book. The reason why we're here. First of all, what inspired you to put the bug in your ear to create a Juneteenth book called The Juneteenth Story, and what's it about?
Yeah, no, great question. So last year I had actually kind of started the journey of writing children's books, which was very different from my, professional background, but something I'd always had a passion for. And I was working with my agent, and she mentioned that there was a publishing company, Cordo Books, or Becker and Mayer, which is a division of Cordo Books, that was interested in writing a story about Juneteenth. Okay. And I told her, I actually have a pretty strong family connection to Juneteenth. As a matter of fact, she didn't even know. And I was like, I would be very honored to write a story about Juneteenth. And it's funny because it's something that I knew that I wanted to write, even though I knew that I wanted most of what I wrote to be more in the fictional realm. Mm-hmm. But this was just something that was a special calling for me. So I mentioned the opportunity to my grandfather, and of course he was over the moon. He was like, "Oh, girl, let's make this happen. Let's make this happen." So every single time I talked to him, he's like, "Is this Juneteenth book gonna happen? Is it gonna happen?" I was like, "I hope so. It's gonna be on a tight timeline, but I hope we can make it." But what the Juneteenth story is about is it really kind of speaks to it. It starts at 1776 with the irony of the original American freedom, right? The Declaration of Independence had been signed. America was free, but obviously there were, hundreds of thousands of people who were no longer free.
Right.
So it really starts with 1776 and that kind of irony of American freedom. And it goes all the way up to Juneteenth being signed as a federal holiday in 2021. So it kind of follows the course of, gives a little bit of background color. And of course, this is a book for children, but I feel like children deserve to hear the truth. And even though there's some people who think that that's not the case and they think that they need to hide it from them, I'm not one of those people. So there are going to be people who don't like this book, but oh well. But I hope there will be plenty of people that do appreciate it. But it does give some context for enslavement and is mindful, of course, to use the updated terminology, because we don't refer to enslaved people as slaves because they were indeed people. They were captive, and they were captive by captors, not masters. There's just so many minor nuances of history that we want to make sure to update. But it speaks to enslavement, and then it also speaks to kind of the varying instances of deception that kind of happened throughout history when enslaved people in the Confederate States were supposed to be freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. And in Texas, they were supposed to be freed, the news had spread there, but they were deliberately deceived because it wasn't economically convenient for them. So it speaks to that point. And then there was the first Juneteenth, when General Gordon Granger reached the shores of Galveston and shared the Emancipation Proclamation with enslaved people in Texas for the first time. And that's when the enslaved people of Texas finally started learning that they indeed were free. This is after the Civil War had ended, and the 13th Amendment had been signed, but not yet ratified. But there were two instances that said, okay, you all are free now. And I think it was something like, was it 800 or 900 days after the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed, that Juneteenth.
Myself, actually.
Yeah. No, I should know it off the top of my head. But it was just so ironic how long it took. So the first Juneteenth was that day, and was it June 19th, June 1865, and then the following year was kind of when it first started being celebrated by formerly enslaved people. And what the book speaks to about is kind of how the holiday evolved throughout time. So how it started in Texas, how different people celebrated it, and then also how it gradually became more than just a Texan holiday. As we know, obviously Buffalo is not in Texas, and how it kind of started spreading throughout America. And it's really fascinating because, I think people think of things just kind of having this, gradual upward progression, but change attitudes about Juneteenth evolved with time just by virtue of, of historical context. There's some people who thought that it was un-American at times, like during the World War I, because it talked about a sad time in history.
Right.
And even, the thoughts of people who had been enslaved versus maybe their descendants who hadn't been, their descendants might have been like, this is just a time to have fun. But people who had been enslaved, like, this was a traumatic part of my life. And some of them actually even have their own separate celebration, or not celebrations, but remembrances of what they had been through. So it was just really fascinating for me to kind of go through the process of researching the book, because, I did know the basic origins of the Juneteenth holiday just from, having celebrated it, but there was so much more I learned. So it was great being able to share some of this and, drafts along the way with my grandfather, because he was like, "Ooh, girl, I didn't know all that," and it was so fun to see that I was teaching Mr. Juneteenth something like that.
I can only imagine the expression on his face. I can see it now.
Yeah, he's like, my grandfather. So it's been really special, to write the book. And as we were going through the illustration process, we were talking about, like, what kind of device we could use for kids to kind of follow along, because it really covers so many centuries of history in the course of like a 32-page book. And there are two adults and a little girl in the book that are kind of talking about the story as it goes along, and they're looking at these points in history. And it actually is me and my grandparents. So it's like representations of us from like pictures in the 80s. So the illustrator Sawyer Cloud did a wonderful job kind of, putting us into there. And it was, it's really an honor for my first book to actually literally be in it, because that is not typically the case.
How's the, I know you recently released it. How's the sales been going so far?
Yeah, so it's actually on pre-order right now.
Pre-order.
Its official launch date is May 3rd. But pre-sales have been going really, really strongly. I knew it was like number one in some pretty, decent categories on Amazon so far. But we're really trying to encourage people to make sure that they also support their local booksellers. And people can pre-order it right now. But it's going well, and the publisher is really, really looking forward to supporting this book actively, kind of throughout, from now in the pre-launch period, and well into the summer, and I'm sure for years to come. So yeah, it's good, but it's really a great tool for schools and for families, for anybody that just wants to learn a little bit more about Juneteenth history, and it follows along so many different points in history that it winds up being a little bit of a lesson in American history, just more broadly beyond just Juneteenth too.
And you mentioned schools. That was going to be my next question. Is there any thoughts of working to get it into any type of school programs or any curriculums? I know in Buffalo, when I was living there was always talk about trying to get the story of Juneteenth into the Buffalo schools and into the curriculum, the tablet. Sometimes when I would be on the committee, we would have to go. I'm one of the younger people on the committee. I would go into the schools from time to time and try to educate the kids on what Juneteenth was about. So is there any efforts or thoughts to try to get the book into the schools?
Yeah, I would absolutely love to do that. We need to figure out how we can. One thing right now we're working on kind of like the marketing plans for it.
Right.
And would love to be able to figure out a way to make sure that we can get, meaningful number of books to kids, especially in, the Buffalo public schools, because I'm a product of Buffalo public schools myself. Yeah. And one thing I realized when I was doing research on Juneteenth is that, a lot of other, city celebrations, of course, in Texas and some other towns, or cities throughout the country were highlighted, but Buffalo was oftentimes a little bit of like an afterthought. And of course, I'm like, as a Buffalonian myself, I was like, this is not going to be the case in my book.
Yeah.
we're gonna make sure this is told.
Yeah, we're the
But
third largest.
yeah, exactly. But that being said, I did do my very first author visit for World Read Aloud Day, which was earlier this month, and I got to speak to students at an elementary school in Park Slope. And I read a little bit of the book to them and shared a little bit about Juneteenth. And, I just started out, of course, asking questions. And these were second and third graders. And they were so amazingly informed on what Juneteenth was already. It just warmed my heart, because I just know that this generation is going to know what Juneteenth is. And what I'm realizing now is that these kids and their parents are basically learning about Juneteenth at the same time. Wow. So while this book is a picture book technically, and it's, really for ages 6 to 8, I really kind of deem it as a family book. It's really a way for entire families to learn the history of Juneteenth, and part of, it's not just Black history, it's really American history, because we can't say, that it's not just about us. I mean, this is about us, but we are part of this greater American fabric, and people need to understand, the context of why things are the way they are now and what contributed to it. And it's, I hope to be able to create more opportunities to facilitate this dialogue in schools. And we are working on creating an educator's guide so that teachers can use the book as a really great resource, in the classroom too. I know that's going to be important as a teaching tool.
Yeah, I look at it, the season is just so appropriate right now, because I think in the last couple of years, even now with last year with them making it a national holiday, but I've noticed, in the wake of the uprisings, the civil unrest following the George Floyd killing, there've been, by the time Juneteenth rolled around during that time, people were more people started to take more ownership of Juneteenth.
No, that's exactly the case. And the last spread of the book is actually, from that period in time, during 2020, when there were so many protests and Black Lives Matter marches, and, because of, gosh, there was so much happening at that time. It was Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, because George Floyd had happened, he had been murdered, was maybe just a few weeks before that. So that was really, I think, some of the biggest impetus for what gave Juneteenth the spotlight. And this is definitely acknowledged in the book. So while it's interesting, the cover of the book is children that are kind of late 18th century kids, kind of playing in a circle. When you open the book, you'll see that there's a lot more to it. So I think it's kind of like a soft entry to, a pretty weighty subject. But yeah, so I think it'll, and I know maybe not in Texas, and hopefully in Texas, but definitely in other curriculums. I mean, I live in New Jersey, but in a relatively liberal part of it too.
Is there a Juneteenth out there in New Jersey, just out of curiosity?
So they did start a Juneteenth celebration last year. I live in Montclair, New Jersey. And it's maybe 30 minutes outside the city, but they did start one here last year. And in previous years, they actually had an African American Heritage Festival that would take place in earlier June. It just wouldn't coincide with Juneteenth. Right. But now there's more of a planned Juneteenth effort. Last year, I think they started planning it a little bit later, but this year they've been working on it. So I think, earlier in the year. So I'm planning on, I need to actually talk to them more about doing something with that.
I was going to ask, have they called on you for?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty active. Of course, as I mentioned before, I did all the things when I was in Buffalo, and now I'm pretty active with our Parks and Recreation Committee here. So one of the members of it is really actively involved in the planning of this year's Juneteenth. So she's like, I'm going to get you on the calendar. I was like, yes, but just please know that I'm planning to be in Buffalo for this year's Juneteenth, but okay. I will make sure that, for one of the events leading up to it, that I can be involved with that.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it down for this year, but if not, I'll be. They've got some festivals that they're going on out here in Annapolis, Maryland, and I'm in contact with a few festivals one in New Bern in I think it's in South or North Carolina. I forgot which one. But
Okay.
in parts of the country, you have a lot of there are a lot of cities that are just now beginning to start organizing and having their own Juneteenth festival. So, and they call on people, they call on me, talk to people from the Buffalo Juneteenth. So Buffalo really, over the years has really set the tone for having Juneteenth festivals.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to my grandfather yesterday, actually, and he mentioned, that so many cities have kind of contacted Buffalo to get a little bit of like a game plan, for how to operate a Juneteenth and what needs to happen. He's like, our first Juneteenth cost us $10. It was $10 for a permit for Jefferson. He's like, now it's thousands of dollars and it's so much more complicated. But at least, it's good that people acknowledge Buffalo and its leadership in Juneteenth and are able to kind of use some of the knowledge that has been gained over the past 46, 47 years to really make sure that Juneteenth is spread and properly celebrated throughout the country. So that's great.
All righty. So if anybody wants to get their hands on the Juneteenth Story book, let us know how they can go about doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do a number of things right now. You can search the Juneteenth Story in my name, and you can find it on any major book retailer. You can also, and I really recommend people do this, if you have a local bookstore that you like, you can pre-order it there too, because it is in their system. So if you just look up the Juneteenth Story under Alliah and Agostini, you'll be able to pre-order it there too. So I'll also provide my website, which has a link to the pre-orders too.
All righty. Well, Alliah Agostini, it was certainly a pleasure to have you on the Buffalo History Channel, and even more of a pleasure to chop it up with a fellow Juneteenth legacy.
Yes, we are Juneteenth babies.
Absolutely, absolutely. In 1976, I was about 5 years old. So
okay.
I think either 4 or 5 years old, because my mother will be quick to correct me on that.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was just before I went into Build. I would go into Build Academy that's a few months later in September.
Okay, all right. No, that's funny. Yeah, because I was born in '82, and but yeah, I mean, I don't remember not going to Juneteenth. It's so funny.
Yeah. When I remember, I tell people when I first went to the festival, I remember we went to all the ones on Jefferson. And by the time we went to the first one that they had in the park in '80, and I think I don't remember going after that. I didn't really go after high school because my father didn't really work with the Build organization, and then the Build organization had disbanded. So I wouldn't return back to Juneteenth until 1989. I was 89. I went back in '89 to work with Sonship Communications on a production they did at Juneteenth. But then I wouldn't be back until I was an adult back in 1995.
All right. Okay. Wow. Oh, yeah.
We all have our stories.
Yeah, no, for real. It all ebbs and flows. And you're in Annapolis now?
No, I'm actually in Greenbelt, Maryland.
Okay, in Greenbelt. Yeah, we were in Maryland last weekend.
Oh, okay.
My dad's side of the family, somehow all of them managed to migrate to like Silver Spring. And then my aunt lives in oh goodness, not Severna Park. She is in Pasadena, Maryland. So yeah, so that's a little bit further up, but we were there last. Yeah.
Well, it was certainly a pleasure to have you here on the Buffalo.
Oh yeah. No, thank you so much for the invitation. This was great.